to talk about burners, but before we get into burners, I had a few thoughts about how this program should maybe run the rest of this spring. And I think we have two here today who haven't been with us before, Tom Kennard and Don Pruden. Tom, I don't think knew about it too far back, and Don had illness in the family and was not able to attend the first, we didn't know about the first session, and he was not able to attend the second one. So if you have questions, Don and Tom, that may relate to things we talked about before, the first session was sort of general and a lot of preliminary remarks, and the second session was on boilers. And every part of the car relates to every other part, so you can't really talk about one without touching on another. But today, basically, it's going to be burning. But I also thought that on that list of various categories that we might talk about in sessions like this, we can combine quite a few of them so that we don't have 8 or 10 such meetings before we get over a complete car. And my thought is that we may need one more session, which might be called engines and other moving parts, which would include all the pumps and everything, and combine that into one session, which perhaps would be our next session. And then I think for the on-the-road training or operational training, we've got to break down into about 3 people with me, 3 at a time. And so with that in mind, I had some dates when it suits me. That doesn't mean it suits you, but you don't have to be suited on all these dates. I do. Since we have more or less 18 people in the group, 16 to 18, I figured that I could do 2 groups of 3 each Saturday that we do it. So, in other words, I'd have 3 people on a Saturday morning at 10, 3 more people Saturday afternoon at 2, and then the next Saturday the same thing, and so forth. That way, lesson 1, if you want to call it that, could be accomplished in 3 Saturdays, 6 groups in 3 Saturdays. And then lesson 2 would be a repeat of the same thing, only we'd go, a step further. But so the ideal situation would be if you'd like to, pick the threesome that you want to be with and sign up. And I have about 3 Saturdays in March and April, March, April, and May that would not suit me. The rest of them appear to be okay at this time. So I have March 22nd, March 29th, April 5th, April 19th, April 26th, May 24th. These are the 6 days I have down here. So this sheet, why don't I leave it right here, and when we have a break or at the end, you can look at it. And I'd like everyone who wants to participate in this to sign once on the left and once on the right. In other words, the left is the first 3 Saturdays mentioned, and that'll be the kindergarten lesson, and the second is elementary school, I guess, and that'll be the column on the right. And so you need to sign 2 places if you can find 2 dates and times that would suit. You know if Chris is coming, Pete, or haven't talked to him? Okay, well, he may show up. If he does, fine. All right, I guess, does everyone know where the bathroom is? That's maybe important, and I never mentioned it the other 2 times, but it's in the shop here. Once you find it, you'll never forget it.
Whatever you say.
Okay. The sheet that passed around here on burners, this time it's on both sides to save paper. I think the first few paragraphs you can just read, and then we'll get into the various parts, starting with the burner casting and so forth. You have questions on on any of the first 3 paragraphs, just let me have them, if you will.
Let me talk about the atomizing type of burners.
Right.
You implied that took electricity to atomize the fuel. Was that some kind of pump, or how did they atomize the fuel?
Well, the Doble steamer is the only one, I guess, that really ever got into production with an atomizing burner. And Abner Doble actually invented, had early patents on a house heating oil burner. And he sold those patents to the no-coal people, and they were the first ones to market a house heating oil burner. So when he got to building automobiles in California, all his cars had atomizing burners. Some had carburetors, John. Some had electric pump, to drive the fuel, jet type burner. I can't tell you a lot of details about the Doble because I don't claim to know the Doble quite as well as I know the Stanley. But I do know the firing up procedure. You just turned the switch, and your burner came on as soon as your house heating oil burner would come on with a rumble, and considerably noisier than a Stanley. I mean, it was a rumble. It wasn't a whistle or a howl, but it was a rumble. And since it was a flash boiler, in about a minute you had enough steam to go.
Okay, that was also a flash boiler. Yeah, I know Charlie Johnson's, the car he converted over to have a flash boiler.
Didn't know he'd done that. Is that a white steamer or what?
No, that's, the car's around 1940. It's a Graham Nash.
Oh, I see. I never saw that.
It's a Graham Nash that he put a flash tube boiler on, I think. But the thing with that one is that it's got a big fan in it. And the fan with the burner makes a humongous racket.
Some of the later developments, there was my father had I'm getting off the track here, but anyway, do we need to talk anymore about atomizing burners? I just mentioned that in passing to say that they really were not available at the time that Stanley first developed a burner, and that other people started building steam cars, and that's why they used vaporizing burners. Yes, sir.
I saw it in the Stanley auction a couple of years ago. I guess the first one they had, they sold a bunch of number 500 Coleman generators. Was that for a special type of
a fellow
pilot?
named Ken Maxwell in Arizona decided the Stanley Pilot was troublesome, and it was with the kind of fuels we had to put up with for a long time. And he developed what was called a Maxwell Pilot, which was basically a little Coleman burner. I mean, adapted from the Coleman type of burner unit. And some people today with Stanley still have the Coleman pilots and think they're the best. I have stuck with the Stanley Pilot because very seldom have any trouble with them burning either Coleman fuel or hexane. And I think it's a case of getting the pilot adjusted right and proper, and I have no reason to modify that, but that's what they are. They're
Okay.
Coleman burners or Maxwell pilots. The grade is just about the same as the Stanley Pilot. The other part's somewhat different.
Okay.
Are we ready to move along? Okay. Most of the stuff here is 10 horsepower size, which would be the size that would fit this little car. Not everything, but and some of it is of the early period, like this car, which would not have a separate pilot system. The pilot light burns off the same fuel and the same pressure system as the main burner. The separate systems are somewhat better, But I have 5 cars that are original like this, and I intend to keep them that way because Charlie Johnson was referred to here by John Hopkins, and Charlie is a perfectionist and excellent restorer, and he has a car this year. It's a larger car, 20 horsepower, called a Model F. And Charlie is running that car and running it a lot on a completely original system. And I compare notes with Charlie once in a while and get pointers from him. But he does very well with the original system. So of course hopefully we're getting a little more authentic all the time and trying to run these cars just as they were built rather than modifying. I have to admit though that every car I have has some little modification. And most of the modifications are in the burners, but this one is not. This is original. Okay, the grate then. Here's what the grate looks like. So this is basically a casting of the early type, what they call the gasoline type burners. Has not been slotted yet. To be functional, this grate will have to have slots cut across these ridges. And
that's the top side, right?
this is the top side. You'll sit in the car just like that, the front toward you. The only thing that's been added on this grate, someone has put the baffles in. These baffles back here aren't quite as large as they usually are in a Stanley burner. Often they come straight across so that they cover the back half of the burner. Now, we have mixing tubes. These won't fit this burner, but the mixing tubes, getting ahead of myself, but I don't know how else to show this. The mixing tubes come through these holes in the front, and the fuel discharges back here under these baffles like that. And it swirls around and it can't get directly up through the grate. Remember, this grate will be slotted. Can't get up through the slots without first swirling around and then up underneath and so forth. The reason they do that is to keep the burners from backfiring. If you didn't have those, and quite honestly, I've never attempted to run a burner without them, but the reason I think that these are in here, if you didn't have those, the fire could get back through the slots and light the light here, light in the mixing tube, and that's what we call a backfire or a flashback. That's what we like to avoid. So basically, that's the way the mixing tube slides in. Now on the bottom of this grate, we have what is called an inside burner pan. The baffles have to be put in first. These are just temporarily screwed in, but and then the inside burner pan is a piece of light sheet metal, 28 gauge or something, that is fitted and cut just slightly larger than the area around the outside of this ridge on the bottom of the burner, and then it's crimped over this ridge and sealed, iron cement or epoxy or something to seal that crack. And so this seals the unburnt fuel under the grate within this chamber. So there's no fire here, at least there's not supposed to be any fire here. Whenever it lights under the grate, as I say, that's a backfire or a flashback. You have to shut everything off, let it burn out before you try to light the burner again. Now, once this is all put together, the whole thing sits in your outside burner pan, which is what you see. That's what would show under the boiler. Some insulation in there, couple sheets of asbestos or whatever you're using under the grate, and then you make a liner. This burner is complete except there's no pilot or vaporizer in it. It shows how the ridges are slotted, you see? The slots.
And they put asbestos between.
Yeah, and that was all done to keep the grate cooler. And the cooler you keep the grate, the less likely you are to have flashbacks. So,
In general, the actual burning takes place on top
on
of the
top,
slits.
yeah, up here.
So no
Between
burning
here
is,
and the bottom of the boiler.
no burning is supposed to take place
That's
underneath.
right. No burning underneath, lights on top.
But how is the air exhausted?
Well, we'll tell you about that. Actually, this bolts up against the bottom of the boiler. Now, this one isn't made quite the way I like to make them, but it's similar. This inside liner here, we make out of stainless because it is subject to a lot of heat here next to the flame. And I like it to come up the same height as the outside burner pan. And then you have your insulation between the two, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. This burner is about a 1/2 inch of insulation between the inside and the outside pan. The holes around here are for the various fittings that have to come out of the bottom of the boiler, except your vaporizer. One of these will be for your vaporizer. Now, how is the exhaust, John? Was that your question? Well, actually, one scenario is that all your boiler tubes are part of your firebox. Actually, the bottom of the boiler is right here, but the flame is under the boiler and goes up through the tubes. So when you get to the top of the boiler, it's amazing how little heat there is. That boiler is really absorbing an awful lot of the heat. But the fumes or exhaust from the burner comes off the top and then through a downpipe to a flue on the non-condensing cars, and the flue runs the length of the car and discharges out the back. If you want, we can open this up and I can show you. This is caused when you're running. We open it sometimes when we're firing up to give it a little grip, but normally the exhaust from here down into the flue back. Also into that flue goes the exhaust from your engine, so that helps as you run along. Well, now back to this, the pilot. Here's a new pilot casting that we slotted. This is a little later also, may not fit this burner, but the pilot goes right in here like that. Sits in there like that. And you then have your, so you light the pilot first by heating up, I'll show some of these various fittings that go with the pilot. This is actually, I call it the pilot downpipe and nozzle. Tiny nozzle here, with a screw with a pin. Because one of these has the, yeah, this one has the pin in it. Let's get a screwdriver to open it up. I don't have to take it out and see how it is. I can pass these around. But this sits right in here like this. Obviously, each one has to be fit a little bit, but this will go in under there. These are little U-tubes that we make and we find they work the best. because you don't want a lot of vaporization on the pilot. If you do, the fuel overheats and you get carbon in here and you have to clean the tube all the time. Or sometimes you get a yellow pilot because it cuts down on the on the flow of fuel here. Therefore, you don't have the velocity through the jet that you need to suck the air with it. And this little hole in the front gets a little mixing tube put in it about 2/3 the way back. And the jet, well, you can probably see better on the car there, but the jet, once this is in there, will line up with this mixing tube and be about flush with the end of it, or maybe stick out a little bit. And as the velocity comes through here, high velocity of vaporized fuel sucks air with it through the mixing tube, and that's how you get your mixture for Bunsen type flame. And the main burner is exactly the same as the pilot, only they never have, I shouldn't say never, but it was never very successful to try to burn kerosene or main fuel in the pilot. These do, but the later cars that burn kerosene, you have your kerosene system for the main burner, and you have to have a separate system for your pilot fuel.
Is that pilot mixture adjustable or no?
Not really. The adjustment is a permanent one. You make the pin. This pin is longer than it needs to be, but the pin goes through the nozzle. And you fit that pin very tight to the nozzle. Then you take a file and just file a little flat on the pin. And the more flat you file, the stronger the pilot will be. But you get it too much, you won't suck enough air. Your ratio of fuel will be too high for the amount of air you can pull in, and then it'll go yellow. So you have to get that just about right. Once you do, it's not adjustable. I mean, you tickle the pin once in a while with a screwdriver to clean a little speck of dirt or something, but other than that, you don't adjust it. I'll pass these.
So, Tom, the carbon problem is that the fuel is pyrolyzing, I think is the chemical term.
Maybe burning too hot.
It's not burning though. It's not combustion. It's just getting hot, and so it's changing chemically and it's depositing carbon in there.
You may be right. I'm not going to get into
There's
the
no,
technical
but
part
there's
of
no
it, because I
burning
don't
inside
know.
that tube, right?
No, it wouldn't be on fire inside. There wouldn't be any air in there for
There's
it.
no air, so the fuel is chemically changing so that it's
Yeah,
depositing
right.
carbon.
And this happens worse in the main burner than it does in the pilot, really. And that was, when we get the main burner, I'll explain why we have a cable inside the vaporizer. But that's
Next question, is the cable,
not in there, not on the pilot. Now, pardon?
is this gizmo? That would restrict the flow that you're looking for.
Yeah, well, if somebody has thought, well, we
Better
wasn't
mousetrap.
running just right, and we'll put a cable in and see if it's any better, but normally you don't have a cable in these. Sorry. Here's one that's about had it.
Odd concept.
It'd be a long time though before these castings get bad enough so the piece drop, then you kinda have to discard that.
Is the heating cooling cycle just makes it,
Well, I tell you what probably burnt this out. The pilot backfiring, which means that you do have flame in your mixing tube from your nozzle in, and this pilot casting will get red hot in that situation, really gets hot, and that'll burn it out. When it's burning normally and there's just blue flame on top, I don't think the casting gets that hot, but whenever you have a backfire, that really heats up these castings. That's probably what did that.
Do you slot the main burner underneath where the pilot is? So so that the main burner is,
Well, the pilot goes in the valley here, so the slots or holes, whichever main burner has, are not really at the pilot, they're alongside of it. And see how this is? In other words, the
Yeah.
pilot is up in the valley here. So, now, actually, if you have slots along here, this side of the slot is gonna be pretty much covered by the pilot, but that doesn't make any difference. As long as you have a flame here, when you turn your main fuel on, you know, this is close enough, it's gonna light it up. Is that what you meant, Mark?
well, I was just wondering if the full flame of the burner was underneath the pilot, if that would shorten the life of the pilot.
It would, but you don't have any fire down there under this.
Okay.
It'd be on,
On the
alongside of it, but there wouldn't be anything under it.
Tom, what, you say you don't use kerosene for the pilot, you using white?
Use
gas?
common fuel or hexane.
Okay.
Originally, they would have used, yes, the gasoline they had in those days,
white
which
gas.
was like our marine white gas with no additives. It doesn't seem to be available anymore. Through the 50 years that I've fooled with these cars, we've used different things, but nothing quite as good as what we have now with the hexane and the or common. Hexane theoretically is the best because it has, I guess, very few additives. It's one of the many rubber solvent, part of the rubber solvent family, or naphtha family. But you can't just use naphtha, period. I've been to up there at Conshohocken, they had that old American Mineral Spirits Company, which was taken over by Unical. And they had, I think, 36 kinds of rubber solvents and naphtha there. Sell you any one of the 36 you want. Which do you want? Well, you get some wrong ones before you get the right one, I'll tell you. And the wrong ones are no better than trying to burn gas out of a gas pump or something. Surprisingly enough, getting back to a gas pump, and here again, the companies keep changing the fuel on us all the time for cleaner burning and all this sort of thing with additives and different things. So the fuel you buy today, where the octane may be the same, it's not exactly the same as what you bought 4 or 5 years ago. And that affects us, that messes us up on these cars. But unleaded regular out of a pump, until about a year ago, was working fine in Stanley burners, these gasoline burners, and pilots, because these gasoline burners still have the same old pilot system that uses the same pilot, same fuel. Now, Charlie Johnson and others are starting to have trouble with unleaded regular. And some of the white steamer boys tell us that 93 octane is working better for them than 87 is. We don't know why, but it is. So this is what we may try. But I haven't had any real problems, but if I do, I'll have to experiment with fuel again.
But you guys must talk to each other a lot to kind of compare notes and understand what's better.
Yeah, we do some.
But you're affected, we're affected in this area by the additives for the metropolitan Philadelphia area, I would think.
Might be
Be
different
different than
here
someone
than
up
what
here.
they get somewhere else.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know, here, let's see what we haven't talked about on this list. We talked a little about the pilot, thank you, and pilot vaporizers, which, some of them, here's an early setup, like, exactly like in this chart. Here, they're burning the same fuel. The center one is the pilot, the 2 outside ones are for the main burner. The only difference is they found out that the pilot got too much heat when they ran these 3 tubes parallel all the way out. So they put the pilot up top where it doesn't get quite as much heat, and a little block under it to protect it directly from the flame. So it's getting conduction heat, but it's not getting a direct flame on it. Therefore, it's just not getting quite as hot or quite as much vaporization as are the two main ones. They found this works pretty good, and we find 80 years later that they were right. You make these all parallel and you have trouble.
So that's the vaporizer part of the,
This is the whole vaporizer, and that's all the vaporizer you have in a little gasoline burning car like this. You don't have a coil or anything, but you do have cables in these. And sometimes, usually as a matter of fact, you have a cable in the middle one, which is the pilot, as well as in the others. These are just straight cables like that, just run through and down to the band.
So
If
was the pilot burning the whole time once the car started?
Yeah, once you
It
light
becomes
the
a-
pilot in the morning, unless you have a pilot that's not working very well or something, you wouldn't have occasion to shut it off until you put the car away that night. You
Okay.
want to leave
It
it
just
on.
serves as a heat source along the other two.
Yeah.
Well, it keeps the fire going because the burner
Well,
goes on
running,
and off,
but even
right?
when you leave the car for a couple of hours, you would normally leave the pilot on.
Yeah.
And it runs off its own fuel supply.
Yeah, it runs off its own, well, it does, except on these early ones, it
Really?
doesn't have a separate
Runs on
fuel
the main
supply.
Hmm.
So on these cars, it is running off the fuel supply for the main burner, which means that when the car's standing, like you go into lunch and you fool around, you're not running for a couple of hours, or you go to a show and you're down there 3 or 4 hours before you run again, your fuel pressure will drop off a little bit because you're not pumping any fuel. So once in a while you have to maybe pump it by hand, like every hour, pump it up a little bit or something. The later cars, it won't drop off that fast unless your pilot tank is almost full, where you don't have much space for air, and then it drops off a little faster. But normally I don't like to shut off the pilot during the day. I have done it though, like down at Hagley, pilot wasn't burning very well on my Model K, which is a bigger version of this car, and I was a little afraid that not being right there to look at it frequently, it might choke up or it might even drip raw fuel, and so I shut it off and then had to fire up again to come home. But normally if you keep it going all day, why, and down at the center I've done the same thing. I usually keep them going all day, but on some of these early cars sometimes I shut it off. It takes a few minutes to fire up again before you can.
What's the cable for? Just for mass?
Cable's for a couple things. Cable keeps the fuel out against the side of the pipe for more vaporization. That's one theory, and I'm sure it's right. People, though, that think they have too much vaporization and all, sometimes they'll run these things without cables. But the other reason is, if this chokes up, you can easily pull the cable and work the carbon out of it. If it choked up with no cable, I think you'd be so tight, you have to drop the burner, take this out, pound on it, heat it up. Anything you can do, once that carbon gets tight in there. And we sometimes burn it out with oxygen. If we heat this pipe and we get one place that'll get red hot, just a little spot, we know that's where it's choked. And oftentimes, if you can heat from that spot, get it good and hot, and then put just your oxygen in here, you can just watch that red spot go right in. And carbon specks will fly like crazy out the other end. But anyway, there are all kinds of ways, none of them easy to clear one of these things when they get choked up.
Can you show me where that mass in relation to the burner?
Yeah, this one down here comes, I should have had a completely mated set here so this would show a little better. You probably can sit in here and have it front a little bit. Straight across. Be about down in there. Drop in about like that. These, it'd be back, but these line up with your mixing tubes, which for your main burner. In here.
Tom, is there a cable in the pilot vaporizer?
There is usually,
There.
the way these are made, sometimes it works better without it, sometimes we have it, but usually they do have it, yeah.
Okay.
Now that wouldn't be in addition to the first looped pilot that you passed around, would it? Or is
This
that
was
looped?
earlier,
Mhm.
this was from the beginning almost through,
Just the gasoline, straight gasoline.
right, really through 1913, although people who had cars from 1910 on all wanted to convert them to kerosene burners after the kerosene burners came out. So the factory sold a kit which included the kerosene vaporizer, the pilot tank, the separate gauge for the pilot system, separate fill, and so forth. But the way all these cars would have been built up to 1913 had this set up. Then when they went to the kerosene, they had to have, the burner was the same, but they had to have a coil. Now this one obviously doesn't fit a burner that size. This is for a 26-inch burner, 30 horsepower. But that's about the way we make, this is a new one, you can see that was made out of stainless, quarter-inch pipe-size stainless. And the reason for this barrel on here, this is over the pilot light. This will sit in the burner like this. And of course in there, the pilot will be, the flame from the pilot will be coming on this block here. And again, it protects the pipe a little bit and it gives you better conduction. When this block gets hot, well, the pilot burns better when it's coming up against something than it does. Sometimes it'll lift off the grate too high and all, unless it has something like this above it. Again, can't give you the theory on that, just know it works well in practice. This too will have a cable. Usually we put a stainless cable. This stuff, which you have to buy from a boatyard or someplace like that. And this will go not all the way, sometimes it goes all the way through. I usually like it about 2/3 the way through. And we put it in from the cold end. So feed it through here. The front, the end of the cable might be here, and then this remaining part wouldn't have any cable in it. It's very often no cable where it goes over the pilot. But I think you need the cable. Again, it helps vaporize the fuel because it keeps the fuel against the pipe, and it also provides you with clean out, which may be the most important, because you could have a smaller pipe to probably do the same thing, but then it would choke up easier, and when it choked up, if there were no cable in there, you'd be in trouble. Then you have, well, again, this type, really disadvantaged. There are really no clean outs except for the nozzle itself. You can take these screws out and you can run a wire through the main jets. You can also run a drill up this far, but when you get to the curve you're through. You might get around the curve with a cable, but it's not very easy to clear these points here on that curve if it does choke up. So what they did when they went to the kerosene, well, not immediately, but pretty soon in the early condensing car period, they developed these burner forks. They have cleanouts, you see. You can clean in all directions there. And they go on here like this with, this is a thread here, and there's a nut on there with a couple of copper washers so you can keep it airtight. They pull back against the shoulder, and then the fuel of course comes down here and jets in through here. And we make too much from the original size, which runs anywhere from 58 drill size down to 64 drill size. So it's very small, but you see, the fuel pressure, which is anywhere from 80, 90 pounds on these little cars up to about 140, causes that fuel to be pushed through that vaporizer at pretty good velocity. And of course, as it's vaporized, then the gas is coming through at a good velocity, goes through these tiny jets, and has a tremendous velocity. And that's what sucks enough air through the mixing tubes. This type 2 jets here against it. Remember, this comes in under your grate back here. Air and vapor together, mixed, and lights on top of the grate.
That's the angle to be mounted at too, like you showed
Well, the
against
reason
the
they cut
radius.
this at an angle, I'm not sure it wouldn't work just as well straight, but they always cut it at an angle. I get, see, these burners have a partition, as you can see in this way. So each mixing tube covers half the burner, but it's supposed to be one side separate from the other. And I think the reason for that angle here is so that it still can swirl better, but I don't know that it means a whole lot. I have one burner that has 3 compartments in it instead of 2. It's the only, we call it a 3-nozzle burner. It's really 4 because the pilot would be the 4th one, but that's the way they made some of the big burners in the early days, and I still have a burner like that on the Model K. Doesn't work as well as a 2-nozzle burner, but it works. It's not original, it's original type. It was a new burner a few years ago, but it was built just like the originals. And again, if Charlie Johnson can make them work, why, I think we have to make them work, you know, even though they're not quite as good as we might be able to do. They also had these burner plates, which was a pretty nice device that screwed to the front of the burner, almost the last thing. You screw the last, except with this, you can put your pilot in and out and take the pilot out any time without dropping the burner or anything. Your mixing tubes get through here. This is for a little, this is your peephole where you can look in to see your pilot and also light your pilot through there. Has a little cover over it. But that's a burner plate. These came out 1919 or 20. And you see all these authentically restored 1908 and 9 cars
Burner
with them on. Pretty nice, really. But and I have some too. I'm not criticizing anybody else. It wasn't original until about 1920.
Tom, I've got a question about the chronology. Up until 1913, the cars used gasoline.
Originally.
And they used that 3-tube
Yes.
assembly right there.
This, now
And-
the larger burners had a little longer ones, but they were like this, right?
But all the fuel was gasoline, the pilot and the mains. And then, and they did not use that little U-tube
Right.
assembly over top of the
Right.
pilot.
Now, this is the vaporizer, which was a long thing, and normally we would think this is entirely too much vaporization, and it is for hexane, too much. But for the unleaded gas, under a good deal higher pressure, see on the cars that have 2 systems, we only carry about 30 pounds pressure on the pilot. But on these, you have the same pressure on the pilot as you have on the main. So it's a little bit of a compromise. You might like 120 on your main, but the pilot works better on 80, so you run 100 pounds, that kind of thing.
So it was all one tank. Up until 1913,
Yeah,
they had
all
one
one.
fuel tank,
Well,
but
yeah,
2 separate.
These kind of tanks, these are your main lower pressure tanks, and they
Okay.
normally are what you have for your main fuel. You don't carry pressure on the storage tank, you just pump it into these little tanks. And
But-
that would also feed the pilot on the early cars.
But you'd have
but not on
one
the later.
of those,
2 of these.
two of
A
these?
few of the cars had one. One of my little tiller steers only has one, but most of them had two.
But the pressure was the same on both tanks.
Yeah, they
They were both feeding the main.
half air and half fuel, or something like that, for cushion to give you an even flow. You,
Okay.
you only pump fuel. You do have to replenish the air every day or two, maybe every 2 days, because there's no provision on the car for pumping air. And the air cushion gradually gets away from you, and then your flow to the burner is not as constant. It'll fluctuate a little bit, just like in short cycling on a water pump, you know, when you lose your air, we'll have a short cycle.
So then in 1913, they came out with the kerosene burners.
Yeah, well, that's right. The 14 cars were the first ones that had the built-in pilot tank right on the car. Before that, and you do see a lot of them before that with kerosene burners, but they had been converted. They had been
Okay.
gasoline burners originally. And they're the cars where the factory would sell you a pilot tank, a pilot gauge, a pilot vaporizer, a main vaporizer for the kerosene, because this street thing wasn't adequate once you wanted to burn kerosene. See? And they sold that as a little kit so people could convert their burners without changing the whole burner. But after 14, it was standard equipment for the kerosene, and it was a separate pilot.
What was the real motivation to make that switch from the gasoline
I
to
think,
the kerosene?
there's several advantages and one disadvantage that I can think of to kerosene. The advantages are there's more heat units, it's a lot safer if a fuel pipe breaks, or if you do have a fire, you're much less likely to have an explosion with kerosene. And in the original motivation, it was half as expensive. It was about 6 cents a gallon, and gasoline was 11.
And easier to find too.
Right.
Easier to find too, sometimes.
May
gasoline.
have been in those days. You probably bought both of them from a country store somewhere.
But they probably had the kerosene for the lighting.
Yeah, right. The disadvantage is the smell. Kerosene will smell, and you don't get much smell out of these gasoline burners. I feel like this detailed stuff here doesn't mean very much until you can actually see how it is used in operation, but I don't quite know how to do this. The other thing, not talked about, let's see. Different sizes. This is the 18-inch size, although as I've mentioned, some of the stuff like the pilots that are a little bit later would fit better in a 23-inch burner. This is for a 30-inch burner. Okay, now the fuel delivery system and controls. As I mentioned just a minute ago, the main fuel on a Stanley is never under pressure. The storage tank will hold anywhere from 10 to 25 gallons, depending on the model of car. But it's just like a storage tank on any car. It's not under any pressure. So we pump fuel into two little pressure tanks like this. And they're tied in together. The only reason they're two, I think you can be safer than having one large one, which would be larger diameter, and roughly the top half is an air cushion and the bottom half is fuel, and we pump fuel in there. Carrying anywhere from, as I mentioned, 80, 85 pounds minimum up to some people go 160. I normally don't go over 140 pounds. I think Stanley recommended 120, 130, something like that.
Now, you said that, there's no physical baffle in there, so each
No.
tank has a certain amount of air in it. And you said that you have to replenish that once in a while? You do that through some kind of Schrader valve and then pop, or?
Yeah, I might say at this point, John, that needle valves and little check valves are used all over Stanley cars. This is a typical Stanley needle valve. And this is the type where you replenish your air. It's still a needle valve, but it has this air connection here. Bicycle pump originally, I suppose, something better today. Compressor, if you can find it, getting harder to find.
I
The
said
things
the
there.
Schrader valve was original equipment, been around since.
Almost like that. The original ones, almost like that. They were probably brass, and they had a neat little brass cap on them, Earl brass cap, which is still has 3 or 4 there. So very good cap. Basically, was the same. This valve is a new one I bought from John Gould in England, and John doesn't make these right, in my opinion. We Americans think he doesn't, and he's a nice fellow, he'll change. But he cuts the needle on a 45-degree angle, and Stanley made them 2 ways. They were much more pointed, and whether you call it 30 degrees or 60 degrees, that was the bluntest one, and this is too blunt. And then in the later cars, they went to 15 degrees, which was a very sharp point. I asked John why he did this, and he said he thought they'd hold better, but I don't believe that'll work out in practice.
Less surface area.
Yeah, but you don't necessarily want a lot of surface area on a needle valve. When the seat gets too wide from having been ground or,
Yeah, I don't think of the needle valve as having, what I refer to is 90-degree included angle. But you're saying the 45 is from the center line.
this is 45, but most of the Stanleys were more pointed than that.
Yeah, so they'd be more like 60-degree included
That's-
or 30-degree included.
That's right, yeah. But when the seat gets too wide, I don't know, they don't hold as well. You don't want a real wide seat on a needle valve. So they seem to wire draw more or something and leak through.
You get less pressure on the seat, you got more area to
Don't
spread
air
it out.
down pressure.
I suppose, in the theory of it, you probably think.
That makes sense.
And but that's how you replenish, and then here's a little gauge that they would supply you. This is a new one, which is pretty neat to be able to get a new one, just like the old ones. But the pilot gauges were usually 50-pound gauges because you seldom put it up to more than 40. 30 is about what we like to carry, but since it does go down gradually during the day, sometimes you put up to 40, and let it drop off, and still have 20 at the end of the day. On the later cars, condensing cars, they had a duplex valve, which had both the pilot and the main fuel pressure in the same valve, 2 hands, 2 connections back here. And the red figures here went up to 50, that was your pilot, and the main goes up to 200, which is the black hand. This car now wouldn't have a separate pilot system, so it just has one fuel pressure gauge, and it is a 200-pound gauge.
But now with the early cars, how did you get air into the system?
Tilt it so I
Well, you still have
I mean, did you have to have
it's
some
not
kind of?
like that on the dash, that valve I passed around, but it's here. On this car, it's just under the frame on the right side.
Now, what I was thinking is, what would you use to generate the air?
dark.
Well, as I said, probably a bicycle pump originally,
Okay,
but you need something that you can pump 100 pounds with, or some of those early bicycle pumps with a small barrel, you could do
Says
that,
that.
all right? because the tires are 60
Astonville Valve
pounds,
Company,
and
the Ashton Valve Company.
now we just use an air compressor if we have
Goes with it.
and
So do you carry something on the road with you when you're?
yeah, I usually carry a bicycle type pump, yeah, something like that.
Tom, a point of historical significance here is that the pneumatic tire was indeed invented for the bicycle, not for the motor car.
Right, and way back.
And
people
it was
think
invented
of-
by a guy named Dunlop in England who wanted to give his son's tricycle a smoother ride. And so he
Is that
had
right?
some, he was a veterinarian and he had some intestine from something and filled that with air and that was the first.
About 1890, was it? Or,
Before that,
Before
just
that.
before that.
I thought some Frenchman got the credit for it about 1892. Am I wrong on that?
Oh, okay.
I think Dunlop
Is that
he's
right?
got a patent on it.
Okay.
There might be some dispute, the French would probably dispute, you know, most of those things.
Press unit, they were around as long as they are.
As I mentioned, the cars, not only on fuel, but on water and steam, they're full of needle valves and little check valves. I can show you a typical check valve. I don't have one here. But these are used for many things. What I've called here the pressure retaining valve is a valve you close when you're not running or when the car stands for a period of time, which keeps the fuel pressure from these tanks away from your fuel pumps and your fuel automatic, which I'll talk about in a minute. And well, these theoretically don't leak. I mean, a check valve might ooze through a little over a period of time, so that's why we have that pressure retaining valve. They decided about 1920, I guess, that they didn't need it any longer, and so the latest Stanleys don't have it, but most of them do. Then we have another one we call the main fuel shutoff, which is simply a valve coming toward the burner from the pressure system here, the little tank, and all that does, we normally leave it open all the time, even when the car stands. But what that does, it just is a place where you can shut the fuel off if you need to work on your main fire valve, if you need to take any of your automatics off, if you need to replace a fuel pressure gauge, anything like that, it'll shut the line so you don't lose all your fuel pressure. Then of course you have your main fire valve, you have your pilot valve. On cars that have a separate system, you have what they call a firing up valve, which was one of the things they sold with the kit for converting to kerosene. And what that does is put pilot fuel into your main burner. That's very handy with a kerosene burner to be able to light it off on originally gasoline, now hexane or whatever we have in the pilot tank. It lights easier. It's the same idea as using a starting fluid on a tractor in cold weather, or some of the old diesel engines used to start on gasoline and then switch over. Same idea, just lights easier, and then as soon as you get the burner on, then you shut the pilot fuel off and you go over to your kerosene. But all these are needle valves, and they're all over the car, but most of them on the dash where the driver can reach them. And likewise, check valves are all over, but on the burner side, you don't have too many checks. The recharge valves we talked about for air recharge. Now the steam automatic, we talked a little about last time when we were talking about boilers, because it affects both the boiler and the burner. The steam automatic is a device I showed you last week. For those who weren't here, I'll get one again, but it shuts the fire off when the steam pressure gets up to wherever you have it set, 500 pounds or whatever you want to carry. And it's a needle valve, usually a needle, sometimes with a little ball at the end of a stem. Looks something like this, but it's a little different, a little longer than that. And then you have your fuel automatic, which is this. And what your fuel automatic does is keeps the fuel pressure from getting too high. In other words, if you want to carry 120, this is the diaphragm valve and a copper or brass diaphragm in it like this. Heavy spring in the bottom of this thing like this. And it works, the valve is up in here, the fuel comes through here. Well, your fuel pump will pump all the time, but when you don't want it to pump into your pressure tank, you want it just to bypass to your storage tank. So what this does, when this valve closes, in other words, when you're below 120 pounds, this valve will close, and your fuel has to pump into your pressure tank. When it gets up to 120, you don't want any more, this valve opens and allows the fuel to bypass. So this is called a fuel automatic. And these work very well. They seldom give any trouble. Have an adjustment on the bottom here for adjustment on your spring to carry a little higher, a little lower pressure. The only thing that ever seems to happen to these, sometimes the diaphragm will crack with age and get to leaking a little bit, and you have to replace the diaphragm once in a while. That's the fuel automatic.
So did all of them more or less have the fuel automatic, the steam automatic, and
Yeah, even the earliest cars.
the low water automatic also?
Well, the low water automatic, not on the earliest cars, although some people have put them on. Well, there are two things, I'm not sure which you mean. There's a low water shutoff, John, which protects the boiler by shutting the fuel off when your water level gets too low.
That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, the cars like this had fusible plugs originally and did not have a low water shutoff. The fusible plug, we've pretty much done away with. I think I have two cars that still have fusible plugs in. You can see where I blocked off this one, where it used to come through the burner there in the front. A fusible plug saved a lot of boilers, but was sort of troublesome. It was a plug that had lead in it, and when your water level got down to a certain point, and the steam got there, and the plug heated up, it melted out that lead, and it blew out, and you knew your water was very low in the boiler. So it warned you, but you also usually lost what remaining water you had, shut everything off, and you had to fill the boiler and fire up again. With the low water shutoff, wherever you have it set, normally say 4 inches above the bottom of the boiler, when the water level would get down to there, it would supposedly shut your fuel off. They're hard to adjust, and I do have a lot of them on my cars, but to tell you the truth, I'm a little gun shy at ever testing those things. Now you can test them, and you should test them, but you don't like to run a chance and run the water down purposely too low in order to test the darn thing. So, with the type indicators I use, I don't use a dead side indicator, as we were talking about last time with the boiler course. I don't always know exactly where that water level is, so I want to be on the safe side and keep plenty. So I'm not so sure that all of those things that are installed are working properly. They may not shut the fuel off, because you get them set too close and they won't allow a free flow of fuel through them, so they restrict you and you can't make enough steam. Your burner's not strong enough, so you have to have it set exactly right. But no, I don't know really when they first came along, John. My guess is that they weren't on cars originally very much before the condenser period. Well, you want to talk about problems that can happen. We've all heard stories about, maybe you haven't because you're not old enough, but I have. I saw a Stanley once and it blew up. Well, it probably didn't, because as far as we know, maybe none ever blew up. If so, it was a very remote situation. I suppose anything is possible, but I don't think what the people saw had anything to do with the boiler. I think it had to do with the burner. And when they thought the car blew up. They heard an explosion like a cannon going off. And what it was that somebody got the burner loaded up with raw fuel, and that burner, and it lit off all of a sudden, and it went bang. And no doubt it loosened the bonnet on the top of the boiler, and it blew the asbestos loose. Look under the hood, it looked like a mess, but it really didn't do much damage. But it was disconcerting if you didn't know what was going on. And that probably is how the stories came about that they saw Stanley blow up. Another thing that happens is burner fires, and burner fires are not infrequent. As I say here, they're rather frequent, but usually but seldom serious. But again, it's usually caused by getting a lot of raw fuel back in there. You don't realize it, or you wouldn't do it. But maybe your pilot isn't strong enough. Maybe you fed the fuel too fast when you first lit the burner. But one way or another, you got too much raw fuel back in there under the grate. And finally, as things heated up, that fuel lit off. And when it burns, the flame will come up all around the place. And you think, I'm going to burn the car up. Well, really the best thing to do is to shut everything off and don't do anything. You know, some people run for a fire extinguisher, but that makes so much of a mess when you use it. And as Bob Park knows, you can scorch the paint on the hood, and he's repainted some hoods. But that's about the extent of the damage usually. But it is a little bit disconcerting to see any kind of a fire, and it scares people when they don't realize. My father used to tell a story in the old days when he was driving Stanleys. He had that happen in front of a firehouse one time. And they came out with all the apparatus, and they were going to drench the car down, and he had to really plead with them not to do that. And I guess he was successful, and the car went out, and he went on his way. But when you see something like that, naturally you think, oh, we've got to do something drastic here to quell these flames. And there have been cars, I guess, pretty well burned up, but that usually was because people forgot and left the main fire valve on or something, and walked away, went in the house where there was nobody around, and this flame started, and it was just feeding itself, you know, and surely you could burn everything up. But normally, if you shut everything off, sometimes you think, oh gosh, it's going to take forever, because it is 5 to 10 minutes sometimes before all that goes out. If you have any exterior air, like even a little hand pump, and you blow air through the mixing tubes or something, it'll usually speed it along a little bit up and on. So it'll burn out faster.
Well, what happens if you think, what do you do if you get a bunch of, if you know for some reason you think you have a bunch of fuel in the bottom of the burner, but you have no fire?
You know it's in there, and what am I going to do about it? How am I going to get it
Because
out?
kerosene doesn't evaporate very quickly,
Right.
or do you just never know?
Well, I've seen, you know, this is what is so, I guess, strange about Stanley cars. I've made the comment before that no two are alike, and no two burners are alike. And I'm getting around to answering your question, John, but there isn't much you can do about it. You can just hope it doesn't light off, and sometimes it won't. But I've had this happen. I have fired up a car, and fired up fine, got ready to go, left fine, everything fine. But what apparently happened was, in that first stages of firing up, I threw more raw fuel in there, and I didn't realize it, but must have thrown raw fuel back, and it's laying in the bottom pan here, or under the grate, and it's laying in. And so you run 3 or 4 miles down the road, and lights back. What's wrong with this burner? You know, lights back. Well, wasn't anything wrong with the burner. I mean, at that point, it was just that it finally got hot enough to light that off. then there's not much to fit in. Situation, it usually take very long for it to burn out, but you do have to shut everything off and let it burn. It wouldn't shut your pilot off in that case, but shut the main burner off. Sometimes, for example, when you're heating with a torch to light your pilot, heating the nozzles as you do to start up. But anyway, yeah, you're heating nozzles here to start up, and you get a little flame. Well, the first inclination would be to shut everything off. Well, really, you're better off to get that pilot going and get it going strong, because as this heats up, it'll vaporize everything and you burn it out quicker than if you shut everything off. Shut everything off, you have to start all over. But these are things that you kind of get on to as you have experience. And hopefully with you fellas, burners will always work perfectly and you never have any of these problems. Well, I try to get them working as good as I can, but I don't want to say any ever work perfectly.
So has anybody ever tried like CO2 fire extinguishers or something like that, or they just, in theory, you just let it burn?
Well, as I say, I'm sure there are fellows, we're all supposed to carry fire extinguishers on the tours, you know, that's one of the requirements of most of the clubs. So I always have to make sure I have one, because it's easy for me to forget. We never used to do it, but we should do it. I've never used it, but I'm sure some of the people have used it. And I guess other than a lot of white residue and all that you have to clean up, I
Well,
don't
no,
know.
CO2, no.
You wouldn't know that you used it.
No. Or halon, but halon you can't buy anymore, so
Oh, okay.
one of the nasty ones.
Was there ever any liquid drains installed in Burma? So you really didn't know what to do?
No, not as such. You mean that to try to drain it out under the grate or something? No, that all has to be airtight. I suppose it would be possible, but see, your drain would have to come through your inside burner pan and then down through your
Through that.
outside burner pan. Wouldn't be the, no, I've never heard of anybody trying to do that. But I'm sure people have, you know, there's nothing, I don't think, that somebody hasn't tried at some stage. I've never seen a car with anything like that on it.
I guess if it really got saturated, it would come out the air tube.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Well, and then too, it can be kind of dampness sometimes. You know, a leak in the boiler can mess your burner up, and sometimes, I had a burner on my big car. I think I mentioned this maybe to you fellas once before, but it was working all right, but it wasn't working quite as good as it had, and I was getting more smell all the time. I kept examining things, I couldn't find anything wrong. And finally, the car was sitting here on the floor one day, and the water started running out the mixing tube. Well, that's usually a sign of a leaky boiler, but it usually wouldn't do it with no pressure on it, just sitting on the floor. And so we got the burner, and we found the superheater. I showed you that bent up superheater, and it was all cracked, and well, this is a vaporizer, but superheater made like this, only it's heavier, it's half-inch pipe instead of quarter. And it, so that's why the super wouldn't work. There was enough leak through that crack in the superheater that all that dampness and moisture was getting down in there. And it wasn't getting a good flame.
There's in the back of one of those things I was reading, there was a comment that whenever you have the main burner on, you should have the throttle on to a certain extent in order to keep from overheating the superheater.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, they used to, I mean, we always had the throttle open a little bit when we're firing up at
Yeah,
one
right.
time. But the other time on the road, suppose you're going down a 2-mile grade, and you're just drifting for 2 miles, throttle would normally be shut. It is a good idea to crack it, open it once in a while for 2 reasons. One is to just cool that superheater a little bit by passing a little steam through it. And the other is to put a little oil back to your engine once in a while. See, when you're not feeding any steam, actually you're not feeding any oil back to your valve. So I don't think for 2 miles you're going to damage the engine. But I did damage the engine coming over the Rockies by probably a combination of that and also reversing the engine. To save brakes, we sometimes will reverse the engine going down a long grade, and we usually open the drip valve, which is we'll get into this with engines, but that's the relief valve on your steam chest, and that means you don't have quite as much compression, and you can almost control your speed running very slow, 10-15 miles an hour, by opening and closing the drip valve. But you do build up tremendous temperatures inside that cylinder when you're in that compression mode. And apparently the temperature got so high that almost blew in there. And it scorched the valves or burnt the valves so that they scored badly.
So if you have the throttle open, do you always have to have the back end jacked up, say when you're steaming up, or will opening up the drip valve keep it from taking off?
Right. Put the emergency brake on, open the drip, and just crack the throttle. You don't want it wide open. It could be wide open when you start, but as soon as you raise a little steam, then you close it down so it's just cracked. Because when you leave too much steam blow through the cylinders that way, you have a scouring action, and you do kind of blow a lot of that oil. Those things are covered with a residue of oil in there most of the time, and that's good. Both your piston walls and your rings on your your cylinder walls, your rings on your pistons, and your valves and valve seats, and this whole steam chest. It's just oily in there. It's a miserable mess when you have to take it apart. But that's good, and that scouring action is not really good for it because you can blow a lot of that oil away, and you can tend to damage an engine that way. Now this car, for some reason, somebody put an extension on that drip valve. We're used to being able to work the drip valve from the seat, the driver. It's a nuisance when you have to stop and get on there. But the early cars, you had to do that. But somebody put an extension on this one. Well, about 1908, they started to put the extensions on. And but 3 or 4 of my cars, you have to get out underneath and do it. So therefore, you don't open the drip quite as much as you might otherwise. Well, it's 11:25. I think we could entertain some general questions that don't have to be on burners if you want, or I could fire up this little car, or maybe Don has questions, or Tom, not having been here before, that you might like to ask. I'm sure the others wouldn't mind hearing the answer again if it is a repetition. Yes, Randy.
It mentions here about the howl, or the whistle. Is that coming from the pilot or the?
We don't exactly know where it comes from, but I think it comes from the fuel hitting these baffles in here. Remember, it's a very high velocity coming back in here, the vapor, and some burners will whistle much more than others, and kerosene burners whistle a lot more than gasoline burners. And I think it's because the fuel is heavier on the kerosene. It's more of a mass going back in there. I guess if we knew exactly what caused the whistle and knew how to correct it, we would do that. I get letters from time to time, and we exchange letters, the one with steam car fraternity, and I had one from a friend up near Buffalo this week, and he said, and they've had a condensing car, and they've had it running for 10 years. It's really two brothers. It's Ed and Charlie Earler up there, and they're nice boys. And it's a 1917, I think, condensing car. And they said, well, that car's working all right, this letter said, but we wish we could make a little more steam. And we have a new burner grate here, and we're going to make up a new burner and want my advice on how to do it. But he said, I don't want a noisy burner. He said, some of these burners howl so bad and whistle so bad, and I can't put up with that all the time. So what should I do? Well, I gave you my best judgment on it, and which was that I didn't really know the answer to it. But I think basically the more fuel you try to put through, and a lot of us today want to run faster than they could run in the old days just because of the difference in roads. And so a lot of people with Stanleys want to run 50 miles an hour. Well, if you want to run 50 miles an hour and sustain that speed, you've got to make more steam than the Stanleys did originally. And to do that, you have to modify the burner somehow. Well, they do other things. They jack up the steam pressure a little, they jack up the fuel pressure a little, and put in maybe slightly larger nozzles than were in there originally to try to get more fuel through. Beyond that, though, there's not a whole lot you can do other than, try to, so they will make the holes, as I said, the early ones were slotted like this, and the paper says that the later burners, this was flat across the top, and they had holes drilled in there instead of the slots. And a burner this size, there would have been about 3,000 holes. In the larger burners, it's up to 5,000 holes. So it takes a while to drill a burner, but anyway, the holes, the total area of the holes is something similar to the area of the slots on one of these burners. They, I think, intended to get about the same amount of fuel up through the grate on one type as on another type. They may have gone to the holes because they thought they whistled less. I mean, originally. But I think if that is the case, it's probably because the holes did not have quite as much area as the slots, or else they would get choked up quicker or something. And so that too affects the amount of fuel that you can burn and go through, the size of the opening in the grate, whether it be holes or slots. The larger that is, the more you're gonna make more steam. You're gonna have a hotter fire, but you're probably gonna aggravate the noise situation. And I mean, a practical example of that, my mountain wagon, I know it needs, or I think it needs engine work. I mean, it has for years, but it keeps running and running, and I've been lazy and haven't done it, but I think the cylinders are wasteful and the valves are wasteful. I think a lot of steam, losing a lot of power there because of that. But it won't run as fast as it used to. It seems like it got so it would only run about 30 miles an hour and hold steam. It used to be high 30s, up close to 40. That's quite a difference. And so I decided I've done everything else. I'm going to drill the holes out a little larger in the grate. So I think originally they were number 54 drill size, and I went to 52. Doesn't seem like much. Steam's better, but she whistles all the time if you open up that fire valve. Never used to whistle at all. And so, it's a trade-off. But if I could tell you exactly what causes a whistle.
Tom, were they badly clogged up, the holes in the burner? As some of them do get?
No, because we do kind of punch them out once in a while. I won't say we always drill them out, but we usually punch them out. And no, I would say they were open to the 54 size,
Are
and
they?
went to the 52 size, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people today I haven't gotten away from Stanley burners much. I did refer here to Baker, Dr. Baker and his burner. But there's been a lot of Baker burners copied. I don't think there were very many built originally. Baker was out in Pueblo, Colorado, and he built a steam car in the 1920s. He never built many, but he did build also parts for Stanley cars, boilers and burners. And Carl Ainsley was here one time, and he saw this gas. That's an old Baker burner, isn't it? I said, yeah, that's what it is, Carl. It's not very much better. I'd love to have that thing. Well, now there's a couple hundred Baker burners around. And people think that a Baker burner will make a lot more steam than a Stanley burner. Well, Bakers have larger nozzles, larger mixing tubes, so theoretically they can pull more air under. Have a pretty nice design, I guess, in that the mixing tubes are on a slope, so that if you do get a lot of raw fuel in there, suppose you can run back out the mixing tube. So maybe they don't have a tendency to load up quite as much as a Stanley burner will with raw fuel. But I think the reason they make more steam is that they've got more area in the grate. They are slotted like these, only it's a flat grate that's slotted. And they have, as I had, big nozzles, big mixing tube, but they do howl something terrible. And I couldn't put up with that. But I think you can make a Baker burner quiet by putting in smaller nozzles and so forth, but then it won't steam as well, and people want the good steaming sound. I still have a Baker. Carl doesn't know that. I might put it on someday.
He's a very controversial person, I guess, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a, Carl is a talented man. He can take a look at anything and reproduce it just about. But the dollar sign is everything with Carl. And if he can't see a buck in something, he just won't do it. He'll do beautiful cosmetic work, restorations on cars, some of them new, most of them new bodies and a lot of new parts. Won't always have the right parts, but they look nice. And but he'll use old junky stuff in the engine, and his famous words are, "I guarantee it to the end of my driveway." But Jim Keith in Washington, Jim he's got steam in his blood and he can't help it. He's a wonderful man. He has no natural ability to get along with a steam car. He does all kinds of ridiculous things like walking away and leaving his fire valve on with the car in the trailer, and it not only burns up the car, it almost burns up the trailer. But Jim has the money to rebuild it again and bring it back. Beautiful. Well, Jim works with Carl on things that they're as different as day and night. I don't know how they work together. But Carl will do a beautiful cosmetic car for Jim, and then Jim is willing to spend the money to put good mechanics in it. And he did that for Ray Carr, who drove without any experience, you might say, from Anchorage, Alaska to Bar Harbor, Maine last summer. And I give Jim a good bit of credit for that, because that car was being built for Jim, and then Jim decided he had something else he liked better, so he sold that one to Ray. But he also had to get it operable for Ray, and so the combination was a pretty nice car. Yes.
You said people like to drive their Stanleys in the 50-mile-an-hour range. Does the 10 horsepower, is that capable of that kind of thing?
People who can afford it after they've seen the larger cars, usually one at 20 horse or 30 horse, but these little cars will just about keep up with a 20 horse car.
Are they really?
they're not, you know, maybe not as safe, but this
Say, how do
little
you
car
stop
kind of is so light, so light on the road that I don't know that I feel very comfortable at 50, but it would run 50. I don't think it would quite hold steam at 50, but it is so snappy because of its lightweight, very responsive, that I don't carry 400 pounds anymore, and that would just jump out from under you almost. And so it's nice, but like Bob Park's car, this car needs some engine work. The piston rods and the valve rods are rough, and it's hard to keep packings in it. It may not be as bad as Bob's from what Bob tells me, but I think I'll put up with it for a while, but maybe someday as a project of this group, we'll tear a couple engines apart and try to improve on it. Yes, Bob?
Tom, I think one point we ought to make is that these old cars will go faster than they'll stop.
Oh, I know. I have some early cars, I know all about that.
Talk about driving the steamer and poor brakes and all, Bob, because you've had experience with that, and a lot of these other fellows have driven gas cars where the brakes aren't much better, but at least they have the low gear they can drop into, and that kind of, which we don't have.
Well, really, we only have two-wheel brakes on these cars. And they aren't that effective to begin with. And I think that's when we get into the driving part, the safety aspects are extremely important, because you that have other antique cars know, and you that don't will learn, the public has no tolerance whatsoever for us. And they have absolutely no appreciation of what these cars are capable of doing, or not capable of doing. And if you're laying back 200 feet from the car in front of you because you know it takes that long to stop, they'll pull 10 feet in front of you.
Right, they'll pull around you and stop in
And
front of you.
stop right in front of you. And there's nothing you can do to stop them from doing that. So that's one thing that we have to be concerned about when we use these cars, is what are their limitations? And we have to work within their limitations. And a lot of modifications have been made over the years to make them run better. But until very recently, and Tom, I'm sure will get into it, there are some improvements now that people have made on the brakes. And I know I got to start thinking about it, because the tour I went on with Tom and my father-in-law up in Maine, we came across, we were out in the boondocks. I mean, it was country driving. And we came over a little hill, and you could then see the car, the road in front of you. Well, about 50 feet in front of you was a stop sign. And I mean, it didn't even slow down as we went through. I mean, not the slightest bit did it slow down. And there's, you know, it's funny when you talk about it, but fortunately no one was coming, because these cars afford no protection when you get into it. So safety is a very important thing, and I know that's something we have to get into as we go through learning how to operate these cars.
That's very good, Bob. These early cars especially have poor brakes. They're almost non-existent. This little EX perhaps is a little better than the Gentleman's Roadster and the Model K, but both those cars of mine now have hydraulic brakes on the rear, so that did help quite a bit. These brakes are just terrible in reverse. You're trying to put a brake on when you're drifting backwards, and it just chatters all over the place. I don't know why they're so bad, but this car has both an internal brake on the rear. Well, that's all this one has. This one no longer has the differential brake. The earlier ones, the tiller steers, had a little brake on the differential, which in some cases, although they get loaded with oil usually from the engine, but in some cases they were better than the first drum brakes were. Also, some of these early cars don't have an emergency brake. Well, you can call it a hand brake. I don't know, we used to call it emergency, but you know what I mean. Well, I really feel much better when there's a hand brake there to pull on when you need to, because believe me, you need to a lot of times. And Yeah, so we like to, I mean, the driving we'll do hopefully will be just around country roads close to here at first. And we'll seldom get over 30 miles an hour, so. But Bob is absolutely right, I've had those situations, it's pretty scary at times.
And you tend to go faster, whether you want to or not, especially if you're on a tour and you're trying to
Yeah.
keep up with somebody, and you lose consciousness of it until you have to stop.
Well, it's now between 20 of and 11:45. I thought if those of you who want to stay and watch another firing up, that very first day we fired up the big car in here, you remember? Whether you wanted to go through that again or whether that doesn't mean very much at this stage. I do think that on these operational days, when I just have 3 of you here at one time, that I will try to start from scratch each time and fire up. In other words, I won't have the car ready to go when you arrive, because I think that'd be a good experience. This one has not been fired up probably for a year, maybe a year and a half. I don't remember exactly. It might have been last year sometime. So I haven't done anything preliminary to get ready. So if you want to see what I'd worry about or what I would do before I would even light the fire, well, I can show you. Yeah, you don't want to do that.
Absolutely.
You want to do that?
What could be done?
So this is a reproduction.
We've heard those interpretations.
We all need
I have a heavier one.
Oh, okay. You're making me nervous, because I'm a tripod kicker from way back.
Yeah, I debated about bringing a heavier one and letting it, moving it around.
That's how I bring that heavier one.
Combination of
This is too flimsy. I have this one for when I travel, but I'm too lazy to carry it. That's a nice one. I don't have one that nice. I have a
The
heavier one.
tripod?
Yeah.
I looked at all this kind and I went to photograph it. And that was the cheapest one.
That's what okay,
seed actually
if it's $100, that's really good. $100.
Let's see where they go.
It's around 500, 600. It's got nice leather to it. The pads on the bottom you can screw in and they become spikes. They're also cushion.
How old is your camera? Okay, well,
You got yours in 90?
Majority of this car.
All right, that's when I got mine.
this one,
That's the first flow
the
that I
70s.
had. The wheels are probably
F70.
the bottom things on.
It did not have a light on the front. It did.
And the body, I don't think the body would be that
I got 8
Yeah.
that I felt was all I could handle. I can't even handle that.
Really?
And otherwise, it's pretty good, except the motor is noisy. That's why I think
Carry around.
well, I think this one is noisier than yours, and it didn't used to be.
Here, the main shut-off plug.
Because I know Wilson was electronics. They're on the Sony list, but I've had, so often I've had something else. So what the pressure Sony or whoever, the battery. And if the 5 takes about a week,
get this valve open, yeah, this right way.
This one on here, it's got the 3-2 vaporizer.
Automatic bypass.
I don't wanna spend more than
That I had no fuel in the tank.
There's no air in the first two.
Now, if I had no air in the pressure tank, you'd see big pressure.
You said something real quick when you said
Yeah,
PCR, I just,
back up.
my old got in bad shape, I just bought it.
Well, I did, I guess that's habit. When we start to run, I open it before I start.
So that valve is between, that's coming right out of the pressure tank.
Yeah, yeah.
This valve.
I went in there and tried it.
I
wouldn't even.
Yeah.
I had Chicago Calvarisi go over to the experimental station to work on it. Works under the name of the video doctor, a VCR doctor or something. I tried to call him, he's not around there. He was good. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. If you're really interested in getting it repaired, yeah.
Same thing.
If they wait till I get back to the West Coast, then I'll be the first order of business to go up there. More features on it.
This is your fuel automatic.
Well, you can get the new super.
So it's going through that check, to the valve, and then up to the engine.
More dots and, I don't know what it is.
The fuel comes from the pump into the check.
You do a better picture, my brother has that,
Down.
one with it.
And it runs underneath it
Some
up
of
to the
these
engine.
newer model.
Now, if this is
It is
closed,
a better picture.
for instance, suppose this got
Go
stuck
ahead.
and your fuel pressure built up.
I'm gonna do
It
that
just
next time,
didn't open to
when we do the
bypass.
3 guys
Yeah,
at a
If
time.
you close this one, it can't,
Well, I'm gonna load up.
it has to bypass because, let's see, how's that work? Well, if you close this one, it can't get back to the pressure tanks, so it has to bypass. In other words, it's pumping then against hundreds of pounds. Once this is closed, it's pumping against the
Okay, so
brick wall.
that's
You went-
before the pressure tanks.
Yeah, so then it would bypass.
Okay, then it goes from the pressure tanks up to the
Yeah,
car.
from the pressure tanks up to here.
Okay. Okay, so that's at the opposite end.
The
That's into the
tanks,
pressure
where
tank.
are they on this car? They're probably.
That's into the pressure tanks, this is out of the pressure. tank.
Probably, yeah, right back
Yeah.
here, right? Cars have some different places.
Over the years, I suppose they had an assortment of locations for things.
They did, yeah. Well, that fuel tank, maybe it's up next to the water tank on this one. Take that seat. Yep. Alongside the water tank.
The pressure tanks. Yeah.
And this is the water,
This is water, you fill it here.
just with a pail, or if you were on
Well,
the.
yeah, pail takes a long time. You want a hose if you can get one. Now this little chimney thing on here, the overflow is up in that. So when the tank gets full, the overflow pipe comes up in here, almost to the top of this. So you can get your tank just about completely full before it overflows.
Upholstery check. And the tires.
It's an air valve.
Okay, let's stick the cushion back in. That cushion's way too heavy. Rube Yeager reupholstered this car for me. The original cushion wasn't half that heavy. This one,
Round corners front?
I thought it was back, it is back.
Okay, I'll turn it.
Yeah, he didn't know how often you have to take seat cushions out of this thing. He makes them all too heavy. Okay, so we think our
Okay, so you
fuel's
said
okay, we think
You
our
think
water's
the fuel
okay.
automatic is bypassing
I
it,
think it is, yeah.
so we'll just start it,
Well, I
you'll just
think
start
it
it
must
at
be
80.
set at about 80. But sometimes, for some reason, after you run a little bit, it may edge up to more like 90.
Two.
Oh, that's your oil feed to the engine. I'll talk about that next week, but there's an oil pump, also a little plunger. It's a winker, that little wink when you, and that's how you put oil in the steam pipe to go back to the valve and cylinder.
Tom, you just said next week. Are we gonna meet next week also?
The first time for breaking in, I said these earlier ones didn't have much in the way of cleanouts. What you can do though is take these screws out, not that I would normally do it now, and with a wire poke through the nozzle to clean it. And then on the pilot, the center one, it has the pin through the nozzle. And that pin, okay, now on these, you have to heat the pilot a little bit more than you do on the later cars with a separate system. The reason being that you really can't heat very much of that vaporizer. The only thing you can heat is what's sticking out here. So you get the nozzle fairly hot, and you heat here, and you heat the others a little at the same time because it all conducts together. But first, you see, we'll get this hot enough and we'll turn the pilot on. So it's not hot enough yet. It takes a little longer than that. On a lot of burners, now this won't be the case on the pilot, but on the main, on a lot of burners, when there's just a little flame starts burning at the nozzle, that usually seems to be about the sign that it's hot enough. So that may not happen on a gasoline burner like this. And it has been a long time since this car was fired up. Now what I would expect in the way of maintenance when it hasn't been used for a year or more is that I would have to check my packings a little bit on the fuel pump and make sure they're not leaking too much. I say too much, sometimes it's a little hard to get them completely tight, but again, on a gasoline burner, you don't want any fuel leaks if you can help it, because it's not quite as safe as kerosene. Water leaks, don't worry as much about, because water's not going to catch fire, but on fuel you have to be more careful. Now I'm going to open the pilot valve. Open it any half a minute or so because I lighted through the peephole to start with. It didn't light yet, so it may be that well, I really don't seem to have any fuel there. That this car has another fuel cutoff on it. I think it's got.
Did they ever mark any of the valves, Tom? I've certainly never seen it.
No, make sure that it's clean, we took a little bit here. We don't open that too much or we could have freezer. But now, if I ever want to look through that peephole there, you can see the power automatic. And steam automatic here in front, that's what you order.
And that's the only two automatics.
Now see if I open it too much.
Right.
it like that.
Fires back.
Yeah,
Low
I think that none of those two.
The water gets too low.
Now see how it's a little yellow,
The automatic
not really
bypass.
nice and blue.
Bypasses the
It's
water.
probably, it could be either a little dirt
Controls the
or
boiler.
it could be I'm gonna heat the main nozzle a little bit too to speed up the process. Sometimes when you do this, the torch carries air away from your pilot and the pilot is bloody. So you have to keep lighting it up while you're running the fluid. It won't be loud and it won't be
I can't imagine you ever
quite as
getting a.
easy to discern with the lights.
Lighten up the.
But now you have to listen, so we work these cars by sound a lot of times. The burner's lit, but I wouldn't feed it very fast yet. I just gave it a squirt and closed it.
This is the situation where you can get too much fuel in the bottom of the burner though, you know, proceed.
Yeah, if I open it up wide now, it would soon flood itself and we'd have flames all over it. So we just give it a squirt at a time until it warms up a little and then.
You're not watching any gauges or anything, you're just listening to it.
Well, yeah, there's really no gauges to look at yet on the steam side because it'll be a while before we go into pressure. I don't know if it's a little dirt. Even though I drained the bucket off, it's still there's plenty of water in the boiler. So there's a little steam going through the throttle, down through the superheater, through the steam pipe, through the cylinder tube.
You shut that?
Well, I really have to know two reasons. One is to help speed up the cylinder. The other is to help protect the
This house, right?